So one of the things that we found out is that the only thing we could dispatch is plain old objects. If we attempt to go and dispatch, and you could even try this out here. If I go to dispatch and I pass in, let's say, a function, and I end up running this, I go to run my application, I'll get this error. Let me actually fix that. Sorry. This is going to be store.dispatch. And it tells me, hey, look, you have a problem. These have to be plain old actions. Now, again, one could make the case, what is this, really biased? But what I'm sort of looking to do is instead of actually having to pass this dispatch method in here, what I want to do is make it a little bit easier so that I could call this function and I'm going to end up returning another function. And I'm going to be very optimistic here that dispatch will be passed in here. And what I'm hoping that I could end up doing is that I can now have instead of actually going in and having to pass dispatch here, dispatch will end up getting passed to me. I could do whatever I want to do, and then when I'm ready, I could end up dispatching a plain action. Now, what's going to have to happen here is that this async is going to have to move from here over to here. But I'm going to run into this same error that I had before, because now when I end up going to call this, and let's actually modify things a little bit. Let's again start on our home component here. I'm going to switch this up a little bit. And it's going to make it, well, I could take this out anyway, I think. But what I'm going to end up doing here is that when I call random person, I'm going to flip this a little bit. And I'm going to end up dispatching. And I'm going to call this function, add random person from server. Now again, if there was a form here, I would end up passing the form values here. When I ended up going to my store, I would end up getting those values. I would build out my request. But the thing here is, again, whether or not you feel it benefits you all that much, I don't have to pass dispatch all around. I could just dispatch, and this will work. Now, of course, this won't work. I'm going to start out on my home component. And when I do this, I'll get that same error message, right? Actions must be plain objects. And what I could do is I could use some middleware. And actually, the message tells me I could use middleware. And there's middleware that's pretty common called thunk. And I'm going to get this from Redux thunk. Right now, it doesn't exist. I'll get this error. Let me do an npm install of Redux thunk. And I'm going to end up saving dev. And if I go over here, this error will still come up. And it'll end up coming up because, again, it's telling me, hey, look, you might have imported this. But again, my store doesn't know about it. So there's one other thing you could grab from your store, which is going to be apply middleware. Middleware could get used for a bunch of things. There's some nice logging functionality you could have. But where it ends up getting used is that you can actually call apply middleware. And what this will end up doing is that when we end up going to dispatch, if we end up coming in there with a function, okay, we don't have to do this, but when we end up dispatching and we end up returning a function, which is what's going to happen here, that function will end up getting called, dispatch will end up getting called here. And in the end, I think it makes your code a little bit easier to use. Some people are not all that crazy about it, but this is kind of what it's going to end up doing. And what should happen here is if we refresh, this should end up working the same way. And we could think about some advantages here to doing this. Let's just go back. If we have it on our home here, we're going to also put it on our people. So here, and again, I didn't need this anyway, but we're just going to sort of flip the script here and say we're going to call dispatch add person from server. And the key takeaway is that when we call this function, we get back another function. And what the middleware will do is they'll say, well, I see a function here. You're not ready yet. I'm going to pass you dispatch. When you're ready, you can end up dispatching. And now this will work both on Add person from server. Let's make sure that we got it here. So here we're on people. And what is it? Add random person from server. So make sure it works on both pages. And let's just do one other thing here, because it would also be nice if we could do the same thing with something else. So we'll also have another, and these are thunks. These are basically functions that return other functions, and we'll call this fetch people from server. Again, this is going to end up returning a function because we're not going to be ready with the people when we end up calling it. And we're going to do something very similar to here. But what we're going to do is that this is going to be people. This is not going to be a post. This is going to be a get. And here we'll call set people with the people. So again, whenever you're using these thunks, you're going to eventually end up dispatching. You don't have to pass dispatch in. It'll end up being passed for you. We'll end up sending people there. And what this allows us to do is now we could call fetch people from server. I'm just going to call it fetch people because it's obvious to me if we're fetching, we're doing it from the server. And I'm going to go over here and use this by going to my index.html page. And instead of having this page worry about the Axios, I'm going to just make it a little bit easier by calling fetch people. And I just have to make sure that I bring in from my store. I don't even need set people. I'm just going to bring in fetch people here. So now this component doesn't need to know about Axios. Again, all the Axios calls are going to end up happening in the server. And my guess here is I think I might have probably left out another async await. So here on my fetch people, on my store, and again, the advantage here is that it's sort of forcing us to put all of our Axios calls really closer to one file, which is pretty useful to do. I'm going to switch this up as an async. Reference error dispatch is not defined. Let's just go and take a look at it because I need to catch it. And now both these things end up working and we're able to persist our data.